Welcome to Apple Teeny, where Siri gets smarter, slower, and somehow that's only the beginning. This is one of those Apple weeks where every story sounds a little fake until you hear the details. A smarter Siri is apparently now standing in the way of basic button presses, and Apple's lawyers are out here implying OpenAI got a side hustle in industrial espionage. The big iOS 27 shift is that basically everything routes through Siri now, and that's great, right up until you try to do something simple, and the phone suddenly wants a little processing time and maybe a clarification prompt. That means stuff like launching from Spotlight or making a reminder can feel slower, which is a deeply annoying trade if all you wanted was speed. At the same time, Siri really has leveled up in ways that matter. It can pull weird contextual info like ferry schedules buried on obscure web pages, which is the kind of task old Siri would absolutely fumble with confidence. The overall rating after real use is about a 7 out of 10, which feels fair. Good for normal people still behind the frontier models if you're a power user trying to push it. The part that sounds elegant on a slide and messy in real life is the architecture. An on-device model decides what personal data gets forwarded to cloud models, so you've got this chain of decisions where the first bad handoff can poison the whole answer. And once you imagine that spread across dozens of apps and years of personal data, the concern is obvious. Is this thing going to stay reliable, or is it going to become a beautiful stack of maybe? Then there's the lawsuit, and this one has real popcorn energy. Apple says former employees leaked confidential hardware designs and even trade secret metal finishing techniques to OpenAI, and it also claims OpenAI coached ex-Apple staff on how to dodge offboarding security checks. That is not a casual accusation. That's Apple walking into court saying, "We think somebody took the blueprints and also got tips on how not to get caught." OpenAI's response has basically been, "We have no interest in other companies' trade secrets, and we're not aware of evidence," which is the kind of statement lawyers love, because it says very little, very carefully. So now the question is whether this turns into a giant discovery brawl with emails, chats, device records, and every awkward internal document nobody wanted to see daylight. Also, Apple's complaint very deliberately does not name Jony Ive, which of course guarantees that everybody immediately starts asking why. Even his absence became a plot point. Apple added vapor chamber cooling to the iPhone 17 Pro and now reportedly wants to scale that thinking to a foldable iPhone, which tells you thermal management is becoming a much bigger deal for these weirder form factors. It also tells you the eventual teardown is going to look like a cry for help. The prediction here is a repairability score in the basement, maybe a 1, because foldable mechanics plus fancy cooling is a brutal combo. At the same time, there's a rumor about an OLED iPad mini with maybe an A17 Pro or even an A20, plus better water resistance and some kind of vibration-based speaker system. That sounds cool, but it also sharpens the identity crisis. If a foldable iPhone exists, the iPad mini starts looking like the device for people who very specifically do not want a foldable phone in their life. A full migration assistant move to a MacBook Air M5 over Thunderbolt took about an hour and sounded almost suspiciously smooth, which is rare enough to celebrate. Then immediately the new Mac showed up in the iCloud device list, but not in Find My, because Apple can never let a setup story end without one bizarre ghost issue. And speaking of needless pain, Apple moved the Globe key on the newer USB-C keyboards from its longtime spot to the far left corner, which broke people's muscle memory in exactly the way only a keyboard layout can. Yes, there's a launch agent script that swaps Globe and Control back, but a lot of people do not want to run little keyboard rescue missions just to get their fingers to stop being mad. There's also an iOS 27 CarPlay bug that is so specific and so ridiculous, it almost deserves respect. Pressing the physical play or pause button in CarPlay gets treated like an audio interruption instead of a media control event, like the system thinks a phone call or Siri event happened. And when that fake interruption ends, the audio engine can crash. Great work, no notes, AirPods gestures still work, so it's specifically the CarPlay hardware button path that's haunted. Meanwhile, Apple's icon rendering pipeline keeps changing between iOS betas, so the exact same SVG-style recipe can look different from one OS version to the next. For designers, that's maddening. If you ship a brand asset, you kind of want it to keep being the same asset next year. A couple genuinely useful picks flew by this week too. Blip got a shout as a better airdrop alternative for Mac transfers because it works without needing the machines on the same local network or even physically near each other, which is a much less precious way to move files. There's also GLINet's CometQ KVM, which can connect to modern iPhones and iPads over USB-C and let you control them remotely like you've got a keyboard and mouse attached. Niche, yes, but if you ever need to troubleshoot a damaged device from afar, suddenly it sounds brilliant. And an $80 travel router apparently covered a 2-story vacation home just fine, especially when paired with a GLINet router's teleport feature to tunnel traffic back home for privacy and access. That's the kind of travel gear tip people actually remember. For developers, Cloudflare workers quietly dropped one of the most satisfying updates of the bunch, a simple cache true flag for edge caching in front of workers. No more weird custom cache dance, and cached request CPU use can drop by roughly 80 to 90%. That is the rare infrastructure story that translates directly into, congratulations, your build just stopped being annoying. Vision Pro beta impressions sound pretty upbeat, with plans to reinstall the Vision OS 27 developer beta, mainly to test multi-tab Safari and the Mac virtual display features that got missed during the public beta window. The beta seems stable enough, and the panorama features are getting real enthusiasm, even if some smaller utility apps are still broken in annoying ways. On the delightfully random side, a LEGO Ideas Bondi Blue iMac G3 hit 10,000 votes and is now in review, which is adorable, and also probably impossible unless Apple explicitly says yes. And Cat@Pot FM now hosts more than 1,421 hours of podcast audio with searchable transcripts and even visual comparisons between bootlegs and official edits. That is archival nerdery at a very high level, and honestly kind of amazing. It shows what polished releases cut out, which makes the raw recordings feel historically valuable instead of just messy. One last rumor worth staring at for a second, an Apple Ultra roadmap pointing to an M5 Ultra server chip in 2025 and an M7 Ultra by 2029 with up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM. That's aimed at AI workloads that need absurd memory headroom while staying inside Apple's silicon world. If that ever became a high-end Mac Studio configuration, the price could go north of 75 grand, which is the moment where even Apple enthusiasts start doing the cartoon double take. And yes, the annual tech prediction game is back doing what it always does, which is revealing people's actual priorities through their supposedly playful bets. This round, Federico scored 3 correct predictions while the others came in lower, so there's now both data and bragging rights, which is the only proper way to run a nerd contest. That's it for Apple Teeny. If Siri asks you to clarify whether you wanted the gossip, the bug report, or the $1,000 vapor chamber, the answer is yes. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.